I'm joined now by the Labour MP Chris Bryant, who's also representing Open Britain, and by the Conservative MP Owen Paterson from Leave Means Leave. Welcome to you both. I know you're not experts, just wanted to get a quick reaction to that announcement from the European Commission of a fine on Google.
Good news. I mean, I think we will miss the European Commission. It's been rather good at tackling big international corporations when they've been engaging in anti-competitive practices. I remember the day when Rupert Murdoch tried, of course, to use the European Commission to close down the BBC licence fee because he alleged that it was illegal state aid, and they saw him off. And now they've had a go at Google and previously also at Apple. I think that's in the interests of consumers. When you click on Google and you search something, you should have you think it's a free and open and fair search that you're doing, and if it's not, then you need somebody to intervene. And my worry is that a craven British government will never take on these big international corporations, not even force them to pay tax.
So is it better together to take on the corporate behemoth?
Well, I've literally just seen this on your headline. My immediate reaction is you always need competition, and it goes right back. If you have any monopoly, oligopoly, people can abuse it. Now, I don't take Chris's view. Actually, I think we have a great opportunity when we leave the European Union to make sure we have very, very rigorous competition laws ourselves, and, of course, to encourage all sorts of domestic providers.
Well, I'd love to hold you to that when the time comes, because my experience thus far in British politics is that we tend to shy away from even the kind of laws, antitrust laws, that are effective in the United States of America. I want to advance socialism through antitrust, anti-competitive practices.
So you accept, therefore, that the European Union is a socialist conspiracy, do you?
No, it's not a conspiracy. I don't subscribe to conspiracy theories.
Now, what about this question of citizens' rights? Why didn't the government simply match the proposals outlined by the EU? What's the extra advantage that we're seeking?
I really don't see how the government could not have made a more generous offer within the bounds of a clear commitment to bring back money, laws and borders to own democratic control. It's a very, very generous offer across the board. And David Day's written some pretty clear letters. I read the one in the Le Monde, but apparently some in other European papers today, making it absolutely clear what a generous offer this is. The only aspect I can see that the EU is not accepting, the big one obviously, is the ECJ. And I just don't see how we can have citizens under another jurisdiction if we have taken full control back. That's like being a British citizen in Shanghai after the Opium Wars.
We're not making it clear to people when the deadline is going to be, so there's still that uncertainty.
Sure, but that's up for negotiation. That's very clear in all the government papers.
And we're asking 3 million people to register, and they are going to have less rights than indigenous British citizens as far as their dependents are concerned.
Well, the rights are pretty well identical, and what is the big sticking point is going to the ECJ. I just don't see how you can have a foreign court. We have hundreds of thousands of American citizens living here. They don't look to the Supreme Court of the United States as their ultimate judiciary, and personally I would have much more faith in the British judicial system than the European one.
Well, first of all, you do actually have to state a date when this is going to kick in, because there are lots of, in every single constituency in this country, there'll be people who are doing good jobs, working in the NHS or whatever, who are worrying about whether they're going to have to leave and what their financial and personal situation is going to be, whether their young, their 16-year-old child who is presently studying in France or Belgium or whatever is going to be able to come back or not, and on what terms. There's a fib at the heart of everything that the government said yesterday, because the government wants to say that no families will be split up, but if the government is still intent on getting down to net migration of tens of thousands, they need to bear in mind that last year alone 136,000 people entered this country through the family route, either non-EU or EU. And if the government is really determined to do that, the only way they can get down to tens of thousands is by saying some families will not be able to bring their dependents in. That's why I think it's an ungenerous deal. But the other point is quite a simple one, which is that why are we surrendering what will happen to UK citizens elsewhere in Europe to some other system? There will end up having to be some kind of arbitration.
Okay, I mean, I'm not sure if it is still a commitment to get immigration below 100,000, is it, for following the election setback?
Well, I just think we have to face the reality that last week we saw our population rise to an all-time record, I think 65.6 million. We're talking about having some think tanks are saying we have to build a new house every 2 minutes, night and day.
So if that means
so,
dependents are the price for this to keep immigration down, you'd say OK.
Yeah, but it's been very jumpy. Saying everyone here has been here for 5 years, and then there's the further 2-year pending period. And then all we're saying is that EU citizens will be on exactly the same footing as citizens from the rest of the world.
There's a standard problem that if you have a child who goes and studies in Europe and wants to come back, they won't be eligible.
Yeah, but we have a problem already with British citizens, you know, from possibly got family in Africa or Asia. And all we're saying is EU citizens will be on the same footing as them.
Is that what we're saying? Because that's not what the government's announced. Yeah, so that's news. That's news. Nobody's said that. In fact, when they've been pressed on that, they've expressly refused to answer that question. But that will be interesting because that will be a significant change in policy. But even if you look at that, last year, from outside the European Union, where the government has complete control over our borders, 179,000 people came into the United Kingdom, nearly half of those on the family route. So you are going to have to split families up if you want to stick by what I think is an absolutely ludicrous manifesto pledge, which was restated on the 20th of May by Theresa May, on the day that she said, incidentally, that if she lost 6 seats, she would no longer be Prime Minister.
Well, that might not be worth much, then.
Well, I think there has to be a balance between growing the economy, so we need to bring in skilled fruit pickers, vegetable pickers. On the other hand, we have to bring in eye surgeons. And across the piece, we need skilled people. And what we'll have, as I understand the new system, we'll have the pick of the world, whether they come from EU countries or the rest of the world.
But you see, if you apply the government's principles, this has got to be reciprocal. So what you're also saying is to over 1 million people who currently live in the European Union, you're going to have less rights as well living in the European Union. So you're actually not just doing in foreigners, you're doing in British people living in the EU.
But it's exactly the same as I said, like American citizens living here. The status will be the same. You are subject to the jurisdiction in the country in which you live, and I think that's quite normal.
But you're doing
you accept that it will that the people living abroad will have fewer rights than they have now. UK citizens living abroad.
Well, they'll be subject to a different jurisdiction, but
which will give them fewer rights.
Well, they may not have the right to go to the ECJ, but I don't hold this ECJ in such high esteem.
And the point is surely that what's already happening is that we're doing damage to the British economy because of the way, the cack-handed way that this government with a tin ear has behaved. You now have so many people uncertain about their future, EU nationals in the UK, that nurses and doctors from elsewhere in the EU are going, you know what, it's just safer to go back home if I can get a job.
But what about this?
It has happened. It's just factual.
But what about our economy is growing? We have this constant bleating from Project Fear. We have record announcements on exports and manufacturing last week. I just don't.
Who's picking the strawberries this year?
Why do we have to have this doom and gloom?
Who's picking the strawberries this year?
The strawberries will be picked by whoever wants to come in future from across the world. We don't have to. We have very skilled people from Romania and Bulgaria.
1,300 vacancies last week for fruit pickers. Last year, just 100.
I just want to pick up on this European Court of Justice point because, I mean, it is fair to say that the majority voted for Brexit, and one of the things was to not
take back control,
not be governed by European institutions. So how can that be solved in your
Well, I think in the end you will have to have some form of arbitration by the European Court of Justice on some elements of, and having this as an ideological position, I don't think is going to do us any favours. In the end, if we end up with that, if we stick to that, we will end up with a situation where there is no deal, and that is the worst possible situation.
I mean,
this is classic Labour. Labour stood on a platform with us to bring back control of laws, money and borders. Very similar platform, written in very complicated language, but that's what they said. Leave the single market, leave the customs union, and leave the ECJ. Now suddenly we have Chris Bryant
well, I'd prefer us to stay in either the customs union or the single market. You differ from your Prime Minister.
No, but isn't there a perfectly straightforward solution to this, which is that there are two sides to this. There's the EU side and the UK side. And the two bodies could meet. We could have, as has been suggested in Brussels, British judges and ECJ judges sitting together on these citizenship matters. What's wrong with that?
Well, I think it's similar to the status that British citizens had in Shanghai after the Opium Wars. And that does not apply to American citizens now. Why do we have to have an outside court of whom we have absolutely no control at all, deciding matters that affect citizens in this country.
Because we're talking about the rights of their citizens and our citizens mutually.
Yeah, and that's not delivering what the 17.4 million voted for, which was to take back control. And that means take back control of laws, take back control of our borders.
It's an ideological obsession which I just think is going to do us enormous harm. The truth is you need a government at this stage which has authority and flexibility built into it. So far what we've seen is that the Prime Minister personally has her authority is in tatters, and she's not going to be able to. It took her weeks to negotiate a bung to the DUP. Okay. Lord knows how she's going to manage a proper deal with the EU.
Gentlemen, always nice to see you both. Thank you very much indeed.